The river looked peaceful, if you saw it from the hill. Silver and slow, like a ribbon laid across the prairie by a loving hand. But get close, and you'd hear the teeth of it, gnashing, snarling, chewing up men's pride, and spitting out bones of broken wagons. It was spring when the river rose, and by summer it had a body count. They'd all come with the same swagger, the same steel in their boots, the same spit on their tongues. 30 men, one after the other, hammer in hand, rope in fist, swearing they'd tame that water. They cursed and fought and built, and each one left behind a rotting cart or a sunken wheel. Some walked away, some rode off in shame. One they never found at all. That crossing had become a grave, not of bodies, of ambition, and the town of Dry Valley, sunburned and slipping into silence, had nothing left to try. That's where she watched from the edge. Ruth Bellamy, Big Ruth, they called her. Not cruelly, not kindly, just ... plainly, Big Ruth, with hands like river stones, and eyes that seemed to know the weather before the sky did. She lived alone in a cottage with a red tin roof and a porch that groaned like an old man. She kept mules, 6 of them, and fed them better than she fed herself. They were named after flowers: clover, dahlia, petal, ivy, rue, and sweet bess. But nobody asked her what she named them. They didn't ask Ruth much of anything. She'd been in Dry Valley for years, married once to a man who died slow and kind, a mule trader. He'd taught her everything: how to braid rope with a double twist, how to spot a soft hoof before it turned to rot, how to listen to silence like it meant something. And when he was gone, Ruth just stayed. Folks thought that was the saddest thing, but Ruth never did. She kept living, she kept mending, and she kept watching that river until the morning Tommy Ray stood on a crate outside the town saloon and said he'd do it. The whole town gathered like buzzards on a promise. Tommy Ray, 22, and shining like a new nail, hair slicked back, teeth white, ego loud. He slapped his chest and said he'd take the cattle across that river, haul them north, get the payment owed for the town's survival. You can all breathe easy, he crowed. Tommy's got this. Ruth stood in the back, quiet in her apron, thumb stroking the rim of her coffee tin. Later, she walked up to him while he hammered planks into a wagon bed. You might try binding the axle with cloth. She splintered less under pressure, she said gently, like she was talking to a mule. Tommy looked up at her, amused, not angry. Ain't no offense, Miss Ruth, but this here's man's work. Then he tipped his hat like she was a schoolmarm, and turned back to his nails. Ruth said nothing, just nodded. He lasted 4 hours past sunrise. By dusk, his wagon was floating belly up, his oxen tangled in reeds, and he came back soaking wet with shame stuck to him like silt. Ruth was on her porch, brushing Ivy's mane. She didn't smile, didn't mock, just said, "Reeds pull harder when you fight, Em." No one listened. No one asked what she meant. The mayor scratched his head, mumbling about cursed land and damning the rains. Storefronts closed early. Mothers began packing. Without the cattle money, folks whispered, Dry Valley won't see winter. 30 men had tried. 30 men had failed, and Ruth sat on her porch and watched the sky change color, from fire to ash. She watched the broken wagons rot along the river like ribs of a fallen beast. She knew the shape of failure. She'd seen it in men who shouted too loud, and women who cried too soft. But she also knew something else. The river didn't care how big your voice was. It only cared if you listened. That night, she stayed up with her mules, whispering to them. Like children, she polished their harnesses by lantern light, checked each hoof twice, laid out feed in quiet ceremony. The stars were sharp and watching, and from her place on the hill, Ruth looked down at the failed crossing, at the ghosts of 30 men, and in her chest, something like courage began to bloom. Not suddenly, not loudly, just like spring after a long, long winter. The next morning came slow, wrapped in mist. It wasn't the kind of day for declarations. It was the kind of day where the earth sighed, heavy from holding too much. The town didn't notice at first. Just a creak of leather, a distant thud of hooves. But by midday, someone whispered, "Ruth's moving a wagon. Not just any wagon, one of the busted ones, half swallowed by mud at the riverbank." She had a rope cinched round her waist, like a saddle cinch, and her mule's Dahlia, and Rue pulled in time with her slow, patient stride. She didn't ask permission, didn't hold a meeting, just started doing the thing nobody thought she had the right to try. Some folks chuckled behind hands. Some frowned, unsure how to feel. Some just watched. Jonas Clay watched too. He leaned against the blacksmith's wall, arms folded, face unreadable. Mid-40s, maybe. Gray, creeping through his beard. Quiet eyes, burnt sienna, kind of sad. He wasn't from the 30 who failed. He'd never claimed he could fix the river. He just stayed. That alone said something. When Ruth stopped to rest and wipe her brow with her apron, Jonas walked up with a tin cup in one hand. "Cool water," he said. She nodded, took it. "Gonna take more than a wagon and willpower," he said after a moment. Ruth met his gaze, not defensive, not small. "I know," she said softly. "That's why I brought 6 mules." A pause, then a ghost of a smile passed across Jonas's face. He said nothing more. Just sat down in the dirt beside her and began checking the wheel joints. They worked in silence, like 2 old trees swaying toward the same light. That evening, Ruth returned with the wagon hitched and ready. Folks peered through curtains, as if witnessing scandal. By dawn, she had gathered all 6 mules and began shaping the second cart, not with brute strength, but care. She used worn leather, oil-soaked cloth, driftwood polished by storms. She didn't try to build a bridge. She aimed to build a way. Jonas returned the next morning with a toolbox and no questions. He brought nails, not advice. And when he did speak, it was only things that mattered. "Axle's tight now. Your lead mule's favorin', her left side. That storm last year shifted the sandbar west. No fanfare, no need to impress." He didn't see her as a curiosity. He saw her, just her. It unnerved Ruth a little, being looked at like that. Not like a spectacle or a saint, just like a partner. Days passed. Each morning, she woke before the roosters, tied her boots, and fed her mules. By hand. Each night, she soaked her aching feet in river water while humming lullabies no one remembered anymore. Children watched from fences. Old men stopped pretending not to notice. Miss Bessie, from the saloon, came one evening with a pie and a soft smile. "I made too much," she lied, placing the warm tin on Ruth's porch. Ruth nodded. "You always do." They sat together without words. Just the sound of hammering and the occasional mule snort. Little Eli, the orphan boy who lived behind the general store, took to trailing Ruth like a shadow. He brought her spare nails, a bottle of liniment, and, one day, a blue ribbon. "This was my ma's," he whispered. She was big too. She liked blue. Ruth tied the ribbon around Sweet Bess's harness. Some folks still grumbled. "She's just showing off. Can't let a woman outdo every man in town." But their voices grew quiet each time the sun rose and Ruth was already working. And Jonas, he kept coming. One evening, as the sky split into orange and lavender, he handed her a pair of gloves. "Yours are worn through," he said. She took them. Rough leather, soft at the inside. They smelled faintly of cedar. "You keep fixing things that ain't yours," she said gently. Jonas looked at her with something ancient in his eyes. "Just don't like seeing good things wear down." She didn't answer, but that night, she held the gloves to her chest before sleep took her. The river watched it all. It knew every voice, every silence. It had mocked 30 men with pride, too brittle to bend. But Ruth never tried to conquer it. She studied it, waded in to learn the curves and teeth of it. She found a narrow place where rocks sat like stepping stones, not for feet, but for anchoring rope. She mapped the current by leaf and driftwood, and slowly, the path revealed itself, not by force, but by faith. By the end of the second week, the plan was clear, not a bridge, not a ford, but a kind of floating guide path, tethered by mule strength, balanced by barrels and beams. She would cross it, one cart, one woman, 6 mules, and Jonas, maybe, if he kept showing up like he always did, quietly, like weather changing. On the final night before her attempt, Ruth stood on the porch alone. Jonas sat in the dust at her feet, leaning back on his elbows. "You scared?" he asked. "Of Fallon?" "No," she said. "Of being the last one left if I fail." "Maybe." He looked up at her like he was seeing every version of her at once. "You won't be the last. Not as long as I'm here." She sat beside him then, the wood creaking under her weight, and they watched the stars together, like two people not waiting for permission but just resting, side by side, the way worn souls do when they know they're not alone anymore. The morning she crossed, the air was hushed, like prayer. Even the birds stayed quiet, as if they knew something sacred was about to unfold. No brass bands, no cheering crowds, just Ruth, her 6 mules, and the creak of leather pulling tight. She wore her old sun hat, bent at the brim, the blue ribbon from little Eli tied around her braid. Jonas walked beside her, silent as always, his tool belt slung low, hammer tapping softly against his hip. The town gathered without speaking. They lined the fences, the porch rails, the tall grass. Even the dogs seemed to sit still. Ruth didn't wave, didn't look back. She just moved. The cart creaked under its own weight, barrels of oats, sacks of grain, iron tools meant for the railwaymen waiting yonder. It was the delivery promised months ago, the one 30 men couldn't complete, the one the town's winter survival now depended on. The river shimmered ahead, wide and brown, swollen from spring melt. She studied it like she had for weeks, the eddies, the snags, the way the light bent around the current like it had secrets to keep. And then, with no ceremony, she gave a soft whistle. "All right now, girls." The mules stepped forward, steady as time. The first stretch was earth, packed, rutted, dry. Then came the reeds, thick and slick with dew. The cartwheels hissed against them. Ruth stood with feet planted wide on the buckboard, reins loose but sure in her hands. Jonas rode alongside on Petal's sister, Ivy, keeping an eye on the rear harness. Nobody spoke, not even him. Then, the water, not deep yet, just a slow lick at the wheels. The path she'd built, if you could call it that, was part raft, part memory. Logs tied side by side, fastened 2 barrels filled with sand for weight, held steady by ropes tied upstream. She hadn't tried to stop the river, she'd built something that could float with it. As the wheels hit the first raft section, the cart shifted. Ruth breathed in deep, the scent of pine, river moss, mule sweat. Dahlia hesitated. Ruth leaned forward and whispered, "You got this, sweetheart. I'm right here." Dahlia moved, then Rue, then the rest. The river groaned under them, foam curling at the logs. One log cracked. The cart shifted sharply. Gasps rose from the town. Ruth didn't flinch, didn't tug the reins. She let the mules feel their own weight. Let the river pass beneath, like a story being told. Halfway through, the current caught the back axle and pulled hard. One wheel lifted. Jonas leaped down, boots splashing, and shoved, his shoulder against the side. The cart groaned but held. He didn't speak, just nodded once. She nodded back. The mules pressed on. Hours passed like water through cupped hands. Ruth didn't count them. She measured them in breaths, in hoofbeats, in the way the sun crawled across the backs of her mules. When the final wheel hit dry dirt on the far side, Ruth exhaled like a storm leaving a house. She sat back, wiped her brow, and let the reins fall slack. Jonas stepped up beside her. "Ruth," he said softly. She looked up. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't crying. He just looked proud, the kind of pride that doesn't need clapping or shouting, the kind that feels like coming home. The railwaymen didn't know what to make of her. "You're the one who brought the freight." She just nodded. They scratched their heads, signed the receipt, handed her the gold envelope meant for Dry Valley. That was it. No parade, no speech, just a woman, some mules, and a job done better than any man had managed. As she began the return, the sky dimmed. Clouds bunched like fists. The wind kicked up dust in soft, mean circles. By nightfall, the storm had arrived. Not loud, but steady, a cold, punishing rain that soaked skin and bone alike. Ruth stopped by a bend in the trail, unhitched the mules, one by one, covered them with oiled canvas doubt. Then she lay beside them, wrapped her arms around sweet Bess and Rue, and let the rain fall across her back like baptism. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and whispered her thanks to the dark. "I knew you'd carry me." The next morning, the storm passed like all storms do, leaving the world quieter, cleaner, more honest, and Ruth returned, not in triumph, just in truth. She came rolling back into Dry Valley with mud on her boots, river water in her boots, and calm in her chest. The town didn't cheer. They stood in silence. Then little Eli shouted, "She did it." And that was enough to break the spell. People clapped. Bessie wept. The mayor offered her the front chair at Sunday meetings. Ruth declined. Jonas helped her unhitch the mules. "You did it," he said. Ruth looked at him, voice low as rain. "I didn't think I'd feel anything after. Just tired." "You look like yourself," he said. She tilted her head. "What's that mean?" He stepped closer, eyes soft. "It means you don't have to prove anything anymore." Ruth felt something inside her loosen, a thread long tangled finally sliding free. That night, she stood on her porch with the gold envelope in her lap. She hadn't opened it yet. Didn't need to. The town would be okay. Winter would come, and it wouldn't be cruel, because she had done it. Because the one they never asked had said yes to herself. They didn't throw a party. There were no banners, no brass horns, no parades down Main Street. But something in Dry Valley shifted the moment Ruth Bellamy came back with that wagon. It was the way people stood a little taller when they saw her. The way conversations stopped, then softened when she passed. No more snickers. No more big Ruths said like a joke. Now when folks said her name, it had weight. The kind of weight that doesn't crush, but anchors. Children followed her, wagon back into town. Little Eli ran up and held her hand like she was made of magic. Miss Bessie wrapped her in a flour-dusted hug. "You're the kind of woman the earth remembers," she said. Even the mayor, who once joked about her being a mighty freight of her own, took off his hat, red-faced and humble. "I misjudged you, Miss Bellamy." Ruth nodded. She wasn't one for grudges, but she wasn't one for pretending either. "You didn't misjudge me," she said gently. "You never judged me at all. You just never looked long enough to see." Tommy Ray, prideful, handsome, hollow-hearted Tommy, stepped forward too. He rubbed the back of his neck like a schoolboy caught stealing sugar. "I couldn't do it, not like you." Ruth didn't gloat, didn't smile. She just said, "You tried. That counts too." And maybe that was the real strength no one had seen. Not in her size, not in her skill, but in her mercy. Later that day, she found Jonas in her barn, brushing Ivy's mane. He turned as she entered, eyes soft, steady. "You really pulled it off," he said. Ruth leaned against the stall, arms folded. "I didn't pull it off. The mules did. The river let me pass. The rain held back just enough." Jonas gave a quiet smile. You always share the credit. Don't reckon it belongs to me alone. Then he stepped closer, hands calloused and worn like hers, eyes full of something he hadn't said out loud yet. You didn't just cross a river, Ruth. You carried a whole town across. And you carried me too. She looked down, heart thudding slow and low, like a drum in soft earth. No one's ever said that to me. He raised her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. I see you. I always did. And Ruth, strong, stubborn Ruth, let her eyes fill with tears and didn't wipe them away. That night, the townsfolk lit candles and set them along the riverbank, not for celebration, but in honor, a quiet tribute to the woman who stayed, who waited until the world was ready to see her, who never shouted, never begged, never broke. She simply held on. On her porch, Ruth sat with Jonas beside her, the blue ribbon still tied around her braid, her boots muddy, her shoulders tired, but her heart light. Children laughed in the distance. Someone played a fiddle. The wind smelled like wood smoke and changed dot. Ruth sipped her coffee, glanced at Jonas, and asked, You think they'll remember? He looked out at the glowing candles, the way they danced like fireflies on the water. They'll tell stories about you, Ruth, but none of them'll be as true as the one you lived. She smiled, full and quiet, then leaned her head on his shoulder and let herself rest. So, if you're sittin' somewhere tonight, feelin' too heavy, too overlooked, too forgotten, remember Ruth Bellamy. She wasn't the strongest, the loudest, or the prettiest by their measure, but she was enough. More than enough. She just needed her moment, and when it came, she took the reins and crossed the river every man had failed to. So maybe the world ain't been fair to you. Maybe they laugh, maybe they turn away. Maybe they call you names you never asked to carry. But I want you to know something. You're not too much. You're the one who'll carry it when no one else can. You're not the burden, you're the bridge. If this story sat soft in your chest, if it made you feel seen, give it a like, leave us a comment, and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more Wild West tales.